C.S. Lewis once wrote, "The great thing, if one can, is to stop regarding all the unpleasant things as interruptions of one's own or real life. The truth is, of course, that what one calls the interruptions are precisely one's real life, the life God is sending one day by day." Open your Bible today to Mark chapter 14. Interruptions. Interruptions by definition are unexpected. They catch us off guard, but they do not catch God off guard. They are not random. They are not meaningless events. In fact, interruptions are divinely placed in Scripture and in our lives for a reason. God uses interruptions to affect change. So God often introduces interruptions as course corrections. So what seems to be an interruption winds up being a divinely defining moment. And that's something we all need. Because as one of the main characters in our story today, we'll come to realize what got you here will not get you there. The event that we will take a look at today in the life of Jesus presents us with one of the starkest contrasts in the Gospels. Now, we have studied it before, but today we're going to take a look at it from a different perspective altogether. It is one of those rare narratives that actually appears in all four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so for our main text today, we're going to be looking in Mark. Now, Mark was dictated his Gospel by Peter, so this is really Peter's perspective. But then, of course, you've got Matthew, Luke, and John, and we will take a look at what they found as well, and we'll throw it into the mix today. Mark chapter 14, beginning in verse 1. It says, "After 2 days it was the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him, Jesus, by trickery and put him to death. But they said, 'Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people.'" Real quickly, this story is like a sandwich. The first two verses being the bottom piece of bread, and then verses 10 and 11 being the top piece of bread. Verses 3 through 9, they're the meat. And so we're like Arby's today. We have the meat. This event is going to take place on the last evening before the last week of Jesus' life. The fever pitch amongst the scribes and the chief priests has them frothing at the mouth to kill Jesus of Nazareth. But they know to keep, to politically keep people in their pocket, they can't cause an uproar. Jesus' popularity at this point has eclipsed the religious establishments. So they have to figure out a way to do this secretly, to do it behind closed doors, to get rid of him by stealth. And they will. They will find a diabolical way to do it as an inside job. Verse 3 says, "And being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. Then she broke the flask and poured it on his head." We got to do a bunch of background here. So here's where the other gospel writers will come in and add details and paint the picture for us. Bethany is where this takes place. Bethany is literally a stone's throw from Jerusalem. It's Passover, so the population of Jerusalem has swelled to 5 times its normal population. So it's buzzing with activity. And so anyone who lives in Jerusalem is hosting guests and dinners. And so that's what Simon the leper is doing now. Simon the leper does not mean in this instance that he has active leprosy, because there's no way that he does. It means that either he's been cured of leprosy or he has one of the other skin diseases that were considered leprous at that time. It doesn't make him ceremonially unclean, or else he could never host a dinner. We know from Luke that Simon the leper is also a Pharisee. There were 6,000 Pharisees at the time of Jesus. The vast majority of them were the picture of religious hypocrisy. They were the poster children of religion gone bad. They were the only group, along with the Sadducees and the scribes, that Jesus went after hard. I mean, he called them out time and time again and exposed their outrageous misrepresentations of who God was. Now, there were a couple good Pharisees. We know that Nicodemus was a Pharisee who wound up becoming a believer in Jesus. We know that Joseph of Arimathea was a Pharisee in whose tomb Jesus was buried. So that's 2 out of 6,000 that were good. As far as Simon the leper Pharisee, well, he's on the bubble right now. He has what seems to be a large house in Bethany. We know who else lives in Bethany. Simon's neighbors, apparently. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. John's gospel tells us that they are here at the dinner, and that's really important. Martha and Mary are serving at this dinner. Lazarus has just recently been raised from the dead, and he's sitting at the table. John says there's a large number of people who crowded into this house, yes, to see Jesus, but they also wanted to see the guy who was raised from the dead. They wanted to see Lazarus too. Now, the Pharisees, they wanted to wipe him out as well. They wanted to kill him as well because you can't leave any evidence. Mark says a woman came, an unnamed woman. John, though, names her. This is none other than Mary, sister of Lazarus, the one who had previously sat at Jesus' feet to hear his words while her older type A sister was agitated that she wasn't helping out around the house. Now, Luke lets us know that she has a jaded past. So you put it all together and it starts to make sense. Like if you just read the account of Jesus coming to their house and Mary, sitting at Jesus' feet and hearing his word. Listen, it's a nice story. That's a nice story. It's a heartwarming story. But now we know why she falls at Jesus' feet. She's been through some things. Life hasn't always been easy for her. The elder sister Martha, yeah, maybe she was like the valedictorian. Maybe she was the prom queen. Maybe she was the captain of the Bethany Bobcats cheerleading squad. And that's fine, and that's good. That's all good. You go, girl, but not her sister Mary. Mary got caught up in some stuff. Mary started hanging out with the wrong crowd. Mary made some bad choices. She's been through some things. But then she met Jesus. And I have to tell you, God bless us all, and the best testimony is not to have one. I'm going to say it again. The best testimony is not to have one. The best testimony is, yes, you have steered clear from all of the devastating, life-changing bad decisions and running with the wrong crowd. But I will say there is something about someone who has not had it easy, who's had it hard, who's been through some things. You see, my family, Jesus magnetically drew the marginalized. He was magnetic to the outcast. He ate with them. He fellowshiped with them. He broke bread with them. He laughed. He healed. He had compassion on those who were way outside of mainstream religion. In Luke chapter 15 and verse 1, it's one of my favorite verses. In the New Living Translation, it says, tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. Why? Like, why did notorious sinners often come to hear him? Why were they drawn to him? Because his love was magnetic. Like his grace had a gravitational pull to it. The kindness of Jesus, the willingness of him to forgive and to restore, his power to heal all kinds of brokenness and set captives free, it was undeniably palpable, and it drew people who had been through something to him. And those who were not welcome in the unfriendly confines of the religious establishment, they felt wonderfully at home with Jesus. It's like the little boy growing up in the deep South in the 1950s, when it wasn't uncommon that whenever you met somebody, you met a boy, a young man, you always asked, well, who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? And so every time this boy met somebody, they said to him, well, who's your daddy? His head would drop in shame because he didn't know. He didn't know who his daddy was. His mom was raising him all by herself back in the day. And so one Sunday, mom says, get up, we're going to church. And they go to church together. And at this little backwoods church, the pastor would stand at the front door and greet everybody as they came in. Don't get any ideas. But anyway, at that church, he stood at the front door and he greeted everybody who came in. And so when he met these two new people, he shook the hands of the mom and then saw the little boy and grabbed his hand, shook his hand and said, yeah, nice to see you. Hey, who's your daddy? And the little boy's head fell in shame. And the pastor quickly and brilliantly said to him, oh, wait a second. I know who your daddy is. The family resemblance is unmistakable. The boy looked up. He said, your daddy is none other than the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Your daddy is the King of all creation. You are my honored guest today. Come with me. Let me get you a seat in the front row. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners were drawn to Jesus. That was Mary. That was her crowd. That was her story. But when she met Jesus, when she came into his presence, into the presence of love and acceptance personified, she was marvelously and miraculously changed. And I have to pause here and comment, because if Christ in you is the hope of glory and Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then the same attitude, the same approach to people, specifically those who don't yet know the Lord, who don't yet have a relationship with Jesus, who don't believe, who don't behave, those who traditional religion would shamefully label outcasts, the same mindset, the same magnetic love, the same magnetic forgiveness, the same drawing grace that exuded from Jesus ought to be pouring out from us to hurting humanity today. Because you don't know what somebody's been through. We don't even know what we don't know about people we don't know. So Mary brings a flask, a small flask that would be worn around the neck. A woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard, an ointment of pure nard. Nard was a root. Pure nard could only be imported from one place on the planet in that day, and that was from Nepal. So it was radically expensive. We will find out in a little while that it's worth more than 300 denarii, more than 300 days' wages, a year's salary for an average agrarian worker. This wasn't a year's savings. This was a year's salary. Think about how long it would take to save a year's salary. This alabaster box of pure spikenard is an heirloom. Most likely passed down from generation to generation. This isn't a perfume that you pick up as part of a gift set at Walgreens during the holidays. This didn't come with deodorant and a body wash. This isn't something that you spray or splash on before you go to work. You didn't open this up and spray on a denari's worth. And it was in an alabaster box, an ornate and expensive sealed flask. One more thing. Someone had to give this to Mary. They bequeathed it to her, not to the male sibling, not to Lazarus, not to the elder sister, Martha. They gave it to Mary specifically, so there's an emotional attachment. Yeah, definitely, this is her life savings, but it was more than monetary. This was all that she had. This was everything that she had. And being that it is sealed, it can only be opened by breaking it, and therefore it can only be used once. And it can only be poured out all at once. And once you do, you can't get it back. You can't put it back in. Then she broke the flask and poured it on his head. Now, with the help of the other gospel narratives, we know that Mary also did this while weeping. She wept. She broke the seal. She poured it on his head, signifying, by the way, you are the master at this meal. You are the most honored guest. And the prophetic picture is, you are my high priest. High priests were anointed this way all the way back to Aaron. Anointing oil was poured on the head, and then it would run down the beard, and it would get onto the garments, saying, you are the high priest over the house of Israel. But then she doesn't stop there. She goes to his feet. She begins to weep on his feet. She wipes away her tears with her own hair. She took down her hair and she wiped, which is an act of intimacy. She took down her hair, wiped his feet, and then she pours the remaining spikenard on his feet. Oil on the head, you're the master, you're the high priest. Washing his feet, I am at your service. I hope you sense the gravity of the moment. I hope you're feeling it today, because not everybody in that room was feeling it. In verse 4 it says, but there were some who were indignant among themselves. I just want to say right there, the nerve. But anyway, there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they criticized her sharply. Notice the words some and they. Some and they. John tells us Judas was the first one to say it. It was his idea. It was his misguided and malicious opinion. Not because he cared for the poor, because he did not. Not because he cared for the poor, but because he was the ministry team's treasurer and he was a thief. He was misappropriating funds by taking money for himself. So that's the guy that's falsifying the records. He's the guy who's cooking the books. He's pocketing whatever he can extort, whatever he can steal. And yet he feels justified to be indignant and criticize Jesus, and he stirs up strife amongst the apostles. Be careful. I said be careful. Be careful of the critics. Oh my, I gotta say it again. Be careful of the critics whose their own life is a dumpster fire, but they feel like they have some sort of platform to criticize good people. Please, please. So now Judas is the one who voices the criticism. Judas is the one who says that. But the rest of them joined in. They agreed with Judas. Be careful who you agree with, because sometimes you don't know who you're agreeing with. They agreed with Judas. They unknowingly agreed with a thief and a liar who was, at the very moment, calculating what he could pocket by betraying the Lord and handing him over. It's the ultimate and the most infamous act of betrayal. Like Netflix has nothing on the Bible. Ready? Be careful whose advice you take. Watch who you listen to. Watch who you follow. Choose carefully who you allow to speak into your life. Do not hitch your wagon. Do not follow. Do not connect your life spiritually, financially, socially, emotionally, relationally, or in any other sphere of life to critical, fault-finding complainers. Don't take advice from covetous people. Don't take advice from selfish people, from takers. Don't take advice from arrogant people. Don't take advice from ungodly people. They cannot help you, but they can hurt you. Verse 6. But Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a good work for me. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, listen, I've just spent the last 3 years doing good for you. It's okay if somebody does good for me. It's okay if somebody wants to do something good for me. If somebody wants to reciprocate, if somebody recognizes that all I do is pour out, and pour out. They want to pour in, that's okay. I need to be refreshed. I need some fresh oil. It's okay if somebody wants to do something good for me. She has done a good work for me. The word good in Greek is kalos. And kalos means honorable, becoming, beautiful. In the NIV Bible, it says this: leave her alone, Jesus said. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. He doesn't say, let her alone. She's done a very useful thing for me. He doesn't say she's done a very practical thing for me, a very expedient thing for me. He says it was an act of beauty. She's done a beautiful thing. Not because there is any clearly definable benefit, not because it's advantageous to her, not because it would benefit her in any way. She didn't do it out of utility. She didn't do it with a consumer mentality. There was nothing in it for her. What's in it for me cannot always be in the equation. Now, we all need some me time, and we all need a little self-love. Yes, we need to receive. We all need to be refreshed. We need to be encouraged. We need to be poured into. But there are instances where me is simply not part of the equation. Mary does it just for the sheer beauty of it. She worshiped Jesus just for Jesus. She wept just for Jesus. She poured herself out just for Jesus. Just because of the fact that the beauty of Jesus in her eyes demanded a beautiful act, a beautiful response. When I say beauty, I mean intrinsic beauty. The beauty of sunrise at the beach. The beauty of a mountain range in the winter, the beauty of a song perfectly sung, or a masterpiece of art, or a perfectly danced ballet, or a perfect game pitched, or a 700 horsepower Hemi twin turbo engine, different strokes for different folks. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But whatever is intrinsically beautiful to you, take that and then times it by 10,000 to the 10,000th power. Mary of Bethany's act is done simply in response to the beauty of all that Jesus is to her. Now let's go back to verse 6 again. But Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you may do them good. But me you do not have always. She has done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. So he sought how he might conveniently betray him. Notice how Mark highlights the fact that Judas was one of the 12. Judas, one of the 12. Listen, this is the 14th chapter of a 16-chapter book. So we are well into the life of Jesus. If you made it this far, you know that Judas is one of the 12. But it's not a coincidence that Peter points it out right here. Right here at this juncture on purpose. This is to remind us that betrayal is no joke. What we see in the betrayal of Jesus is one of the most heartbreaking and appalling and horrifying acts you could possibly imagine. It's to remind us that this is a severe and brutal act that is about to take place. Judas, because he was one of the 12, it means he had unlimited, unrestricted access to Jesus. It means he was a friend. Now from Matthew, we know that Judas sells Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. At that time, you ready for this? 30 pieces of silver was the minimum price to purchase the lowliest of slaves. It was a minimum set price. If it was at auction, the bidding would begin at 30 pieces of silver. It was the minimum possible price to pay for a man. So according to Judas, Jesus' entire life was worth the lowest possible price for a person in the lowest circumstance. According to Judas, Jesus was worth the lowest of the low. According to Judas, Jesus was more valuable to him dead than alive. And we know that after he took the money, he gave it back, and then he tragically took his own life. What we see in Judas is this: there is a tendency in us to view the entire world transactionally, as a means to our own end, to see the world as if it revolves around us, our needs, our wants, our desires, at the expense of others. There is an ugly tendency in us to view the whole world around us through a cost-benefit analysis, calculating if what we will gain will outweigh what we invest. Judas makes the calculation. Like, he allows the inquiry. He takes the call. He returns the message. He gives in to the invitation into a conversation that should have never taken place. He figures out how he can benefit, what's in it for him. And if your life becomes just a series of calculations, it will destroy you. What you see in Judas is deplorable, and as horrifying as it is, calculating the value of Jesus Christ simply around the advantage and benefit and convenience and personal gain and usefulness it provided him is something people still have a tendency to do today. There is a tendency in our relationships, in our work, in our interactions with others. There's a tendency to evaluate everything based on definable, calculable utility to us. How can I use this? What can I get out of this? How will I benefit? In the end, what's in it for me? We subconsciously say things like, Lord, I'll commit if you make my life just the way I want it to be. If I can define my life, if I can control outcomes, if I can write my own ticket, as long as you are useful and profitable, as long as you function for my convenience and my comfort, as long as you make my dreams come true, then I'm all in, God. And the Bible calls that, in both the Hebrew and the Greek, jacked up. Loose translation. But the Bible does call it wickedness. The Bible does call it a twisted perspective. And it has the power to destroy our lives just like it did Judas. And here's where the beautiful contrast is so striking. Judas is calculating what Jesus is worth to him, while Mary of Bethany is giving up all that she is worth to Jesus. I want to use three things that Jesus said in her defense as takeaways as we conclude this morning. She has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial, Jesus said. Now, for quite some time now, Jesus has been talking about his impending death. He's been adding more and more detail. He's explained the meaning. He's actually taught parables around his death by now. He has set his face like a flint towards Jerusalem, toward this week, toward that day, toward that hill, toward the cross. And Mary of Bethany gets it. The one who's been through some things, the one who's made some mistakes, the one who used to hang out with the wrong crowd. She has done this for my burial, and she seems to be like the only one in the room that gets it. It's as if everything fades to black for Mary. She's focused. Like, who cares what anybody else thinks? He's gonna die, and he's gonna die for me. He is gonna take my place. The chastisement for my peace will be placed upon him. See, when you understand his message, when you understand his mission, when you understand the beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ, it changes everything. It transforms your view of the entire world. Even the most valuable possessions begin to fade. Like your possessions no longer possess you. Even the most valuable treasure you have pales in comparison to the beauty of Jesus, and this changes you. John would say, we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father. And when we get greater glimpses of his glory, when we behold his glory, when we behold the beauty of the Lord, it changes everything. Work is different because it's no longer me first. Friendships, relationships are different because they don't serve as a means of accruing social capital to be cashed in sometime in the future. It changes your relationship with God when you see the beauty of Jesus. Your relationship with God is no longer based on calculable benefit. Now your relationship with God is solely based on the awe-inspiring beauty of all that he is. Like he is the benefit. He is like the capital B, underlined, bold, highlighted benefit of all benefits. He is your exceedingly great reward. Who needs the applause of men when God is your reward? And when who Jesus is and what he has done becomes beautiful to you, you will naturally respond with doing beautiful things for him. Mary sees the beauty of who he is. She sees the beauty of who he is to her now and what he has done for her presently. But she looks beyond. She sees his death approaching. She looks forward. You see, when you behold his glory, everything becomes visionary instead of mercenary. In other words, everything becomes about investing yourself rather than investing for yourself. Listen, you know God's got you. I said, you know God's got you. That you know that if you sow yourself, if you sow seed, that it's coming back to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, so you don't have to be focused on that. You don't need to. You don't need to sweat you. Right? God's got you. What you have to do is focus on him, minister to him, worship him, pour out your oil and your tears on him. Let Jesus be the center. It's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And it's what Mary is totally caught up in the moment. Here's how Jesus characterized it. She has done what she could. Say it with me. She has done what she could. Say it again much louder. She has done what she could. Now follow me here. Because Mary gets a huge biblical principle that unfortunately many today seem to miss or to excuse away. She had received at the feet of Jesus. But that wasn't enough. She knew she needed to go further. She knew that she needed to go deeper. She knew that she had to give. She knew that the sheer beauty of who he is requires a response. Not out of law, but out of love. Not because she had to, but because she felt compelled to. The love of God compels us. So she didn't hold back. She didn't tighten her grip. She let go. She did what she could. She didn't do the bare minimum. She didn't take the path of least resistance. She did her utmost for his highest. She did what she could, whatever was in her power, whatever her resources. Listen, God is not asking you to do something but with something he hasn't already given you. And God is not measuring you by what he gave to somebody else, but he is asking you to do the level best you can with what he has given you. When she poured out that alabaster box, she poured out her heart. She poured out her soul. She poured out her praise. She poured out her worship. She poured out everything on the Lord. She did what she could. So what do you have? What can you give? What can you pour out? Can you pour out your praise? Can you pour out worship? Can you pour out adoration on the Lord? Can you pour out your finances? Will you let him use your business? Will you let Jesus get in your boat? Can you pour out your service? Can you pour out on somebody else? Make somebody else's day great. Make somebody else's dream come true. Can you pour out your heart and your soul in fervent prayer? Can it be said of you, he did all that he could do. She did all that she could do. Go ahead. Break the box of the formerly familiar. And lift your hands in worship and lift your song in praise and break the box and give God what he is due. Listen, you've wasted too much time already worrying about what other people are gonna think, and God does not bless you according to other people's opinion of you. He blesses you based on his opinion of you, and he thinks very highly of you. So go ahead, break your box. Pour it out on Jesus. Can you pour out your petitions to God? Can you pour out your requests? Can you pour out your intercession for your wayward child? Break the box and pour it out. Can you pour yourself out by laying hands on the sick? Can you pour yourself out in generosity toward the poor? Can you pour yourself out by reaching out to somebody who doesn't have a relationship with God? Someone who's lost, someone who's hurting. She did what she could do. What can you do? What do you have? What opportunities, what resources, what influence? Not the least you can do. What's the most you can do? Why? Why should we? Because when you understand that Jesus utterly and in every way poured himself out for you, pouring yourself out on him is the only reasonable response. Let me say it again. When you understand that Jesus utterly and in every way poured himself out for you, pouring yourself out on him is the only reasonable response. What we see in Mary is someone who did not calculate any material cost. She wasn't concerned with the return on her investment. She simply poured out her life savings. She poured out her livelihood. She poured out her life on Jesus. And yeah, what she did was over the top. What she did was lavish. What she did was extravagant. And in that moment, can you see it? She becomes utterly self-forgetful. Imagine how passionate, how free, how captivated, how enraptured, how enthralled. Everything else fades into the background. It's like portrait mode, right? Portrait mode. Everything else in the background just gets all fuzzy, and Jesus comes into perfect focus. In seeing the beauty of Jesus, she utterly forgets everything about herself. What the critics, led by Judas, could never understand was the beauty of Mary's act. They never appreciated it. They never saw how glorious and how magnanimous this act was. They were too busy calculating, too much in their heads. But they not only failed to see the beauty of Mary's act, they failed to see the beauty of Jesus' coming act that she was preparing him for, his coming death. You see, when he died, he was utterly self-forgetful, utterly vulnerable, lavish beyond measure, extravagant beyond compare, infinitely costly. Yet Jesus didn't just give up his life savings, he gave up his life. His box wasn't broken, his body was broken. He didn't pour out costly oil of nard, he poured out costly sinless blood. See, in the story, we not only see a woman who broke and poured out all that she had on someone who was infinitely worthy, but we also see Jesus utterly broken, pouring himself out, giving his whole life for people who are utterly unworthy. Why? Why did he do it? He did it because you were his beauty. You are his song perfectly sung. You are his ballet perfectly danced, his masterpiece perfectly painted, his ball game perfectly pitched, times 10,000 to the 10,000th power. He did it because he deemed you worthy in his eyes. He estimated your value to be of ultimate price because you are his treasure. You are his prize. When you see the beauty of what he's done, when you see that someone gave himself, all of himself, the one who is infinitely worthy for the ones who are utterly unworthy, that he was broken and emptied out for you, when you grasp that and when you are in awe of that, not just cognitively, but when you are captivated and amazed and enthralled in your heart, in your soul, it changes you. It makes you fall on your knees in worship. It compels you to break your box. So break your box and be poured out. Let me say it again. Break your box and be poured out. Break from tradition. Break away from the status quo. Break from doing just enough and be poured out. Like what got you here won't get you there. God is calling you to a depth of relationship, to a depth of worship, to a depth of knowledge that you have never experienced before. Like you might have sat at his feet and heard his word, but now he's calling you deeper. Jesus is calling you not just to receive, but to respond. God is calling you to the next level in your spiritual growth, to the next level in your discipleship, to the next level of walking with him, where you break your box and you're poured out, where you break your box in lavish generosity. You break your box and you pour out forgiveness. You break your box, you pour out his love. You pour out his kindness, his compassion. You pour out your best you. And here's the final why. Why should you? Why should you respond to his lavishness lavishly? Why should you respond to his beauty beautifully? Because you just never know. You never know. You never know how far the ripple effect will go. You don't know how long and how far reaching. You don't know who you will touch through whoever you touch. Jesus said, assuredly I say to you, this is one of the verilies. This is one of the amen. Perk up your ears and hear this, everybody. Assuredly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her. Mary never knew her act of unrestrained worship, her act of extravagance, her responsive pouring out of her highest and best would affect generations, would be read about for millennia, would become a part of the eternal written word of God, that what she did would be forever settled in heaven. Listen, heaven and earth will pass away, but this story will by no means pass away. So when Mary saturated him in spikenard, First on his head and then down on his beard and soaking into his garments and then poured out on his feet. Pure spikenard was so potent that it filled Simon's sizable house with its fragrance. Pure spikenard was a fragrance that was so strong that Jesus would smell it throughout the week ahead. When he prayed in great distress of soul in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Judas would betray him with a kiss, when he was arrested, tried, beaten, spit upon, crowned with thorns, barbarically crucified, there would be a hint of a fragrance that would serve as a reminder. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Final thought. When we break our box and we allow ourselves to be passionately poured out, there's a fragrance. There's a fragrance. There is a sweet smelling aroma that fills our house, that fills this house, that fills your house, that fills your household, that fills the house of our lives and all the rooms in it. Watch this in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 14. The Message Bible says this: in the Messiah, in Christ, God leads us from place to place in one perpetual victory parade. Through us, he brings knowledge of Christ. Everywhere we go, people breathe in the exquisite fragrance. Oh, do you want to have the scent of Jesus on you everywhere you go? Want it to fill your house, want it to fill your marriage, want it to fill your kids, your friendships, your legacy, even be remembered for generations. Break your box. Be poured out on the one who was poured out for you. Amen.